The Trump administration has bombed Iran with strikes President Trump claims have obliterated the country's nuclear enrichment facilities, 10 days after Israel launched its attacks on the country. Iran's foreign minister denied that the US strikes had caused a major blow and accused the US of breaking international law. Tehran is threatening retaliation, including closing a strategically important sea passage. The UN Security Council is holding an emergency meeting now. The Secretary-General said dialogue must prevail to stop the Middle East falling into a cycle of retaliation. Well, the US struck 3 key uranium enrichment sites, one of them Fordo. These are the latest satellite images of that area. Difficult to assess the extent of the damage because the site is built deep under mountains. The US also bombed the nuclear sites of Natanz and Isfahan. This is Isfahan before the US strikes, and afterwards you can see the damage inflicted by the bombing. We're dedicating most of our programme to looking at how the US carried out the attack, to global reaction. Chris Mason will be here to tell us about a phone call that's just happened between Donald Trump and Keir Starmer. And crucially, we look at what may happen next. We also report from Israel after Iran launched another barrage of missiles today. Our BBC Persian colleagues have been hearing from people inside Iran. And we report from Turkey's border with Iran as people leave. First tonight, let's go to Sarah Smith in Washington. Sarah.
Donald Trump has just posted on social media that the damage to Iran's nuclear strikes is monumental. But at the same time, he is trying to stress that he doesn't believe his country is now at war with Iran. The Vice President, J.D. Vance, has said they are at war with Iran's nuclear program, but not with the country. And you've got officials emphasising that they're not trying to topple the ruling regime in Tehran. And the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, saying it's time to get back to direct negotiations between the US and Iran, and that America would be ready to talk tomorrow. All of this is very clearly aimed at trying to stop this spiralling out of control and becoming a full-scale war between America and Iran. Donald Trump, who promised to end foreign wars, went on live television to announce the attacks that may have just made him yet another wartime president.
Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier.
In the White House Situation Room with his top security officials, President Trump, making the final decision to attack, had to calculate what the consequences might be. Will airstrikes against Iran's nuclear sites result in attacks on US forces that could start a full-scale war? In these pictures from Isfahan, you can see and hear the airstrikes hitting one of the 3 nuclear sites attacked. Iran obviously knew this was a possibility, but may not have been expecting it so soon. President Trump had said he would take up to 2 weeks to decide whether to take military action. At the Pentagon, they want to say this operation is already over. Iran should not respond.
The operation President Trump planned was bold, and it was brilliant, showing the world that American deterrence is back. When this president speaks, the world should listen.
This Pentagon map shows warplanes taking off from Missouri in the American heartland and flying a 40-hour round trip to deliver their enormous munitions, 14 bunker buster bombs. What damage did they do? These satellite photographs show the underground nuclear site at Fordo before and then after the airstrikes. The B-2 bombers totally obliterated the site, claimed Donald Trump. The US military haven't actually made a final assessment, but say the facility has been severely damaged, not destroyed. Iran has said it will respond in self-defense. It hasn't said how.
It is an outrageous, grave and unprecedented violation of the fundamental principles of the Charter of the United Nations and international law. The warmongering and lawless administration in Washington is solely and fully responsible for the dangerous consequences and far-reaching implications of its act of aggression.
world leaders have hastily convened crisis meetings in international capitals, aware that a growing conflict would affect them all. The UN Security Council is in emergency session, deeply concerned about military escalation in the Middle East.
The people of the region cannot endure another cycle of destruction. And yet, we now risk descending into a rat hole of retaliation after retaliation.
The US Congress was not consulted before the strikes. The president can take limited military actions without it. Only Congress can authorize going to war. Democrats claim Mr. Trump has acted unconstitutionally.
This is the U.S. jumping into a war of choice at Donald Trump's urging, without any compelling national security interest for the United States to act in this way, particularly without a debate and vote in Congress.
As these B-2 bombers are seen returning to their American base, their commanders don't know if they have undertaken a specific, limited mission or started a war. How will Iran retaliate for these airstrikes, and what will the US do then? This is a delicate and dangerous moment in the Middle East and around the world.
And let's talk to Sarah in Washington. What's your sense, Sarah, of whether the Trump administration thinks this operation is over?
Well, as far as they're concerned, yes, they want this to be an end to it, but of course it's not entirely up to them how Iran responds to this, and that's why there is such deep concern all the way around the world that this could easily get out of control with disastrous consequences that would actually go beyond the Middle East. You've got the leaders, for instance, of Britain, France and Germany coming together to urge Iran not to do anything that would further destabilise the region, because just think about it. Iran could, in retaliation, easily try to hit one of the many nearby US bases. If any Americans were to be killed, Donald Trump would feel compelled to respond to that, and you can see easily how this could then begin to escalate. It's important also to watch what's being said from Russia and from China, because those are allies of Iran. So far, both countries have condemned the airstrikes and said that they've breached international law. But they also are urging a return to diplomacy, not more fighting, and neither of them have given any indication so far that they would do anything to help Iran, which is important when we look at the way that this could possibly escalate around the world.
Sarah, thank you for now. Sarah Smith. Well, more than 100 US warplanes, including stealth bombers, were used to carry out the attacks, codenamed Operation Midnight Hammer. As we've heard, President Trump said in his TV address that Iran's nuclear facilities were obliterated. Our security analyst Gordon Carrera has been working with BBC Verify to assess whether that really is the case.
American B-2 stealth bombers returning home today after a strike that took Iran and the world by surprise, and having dropped weapons never used before in conflict. One group of B-2s had flown from their base in the US out west towards the Pacific. They were a decoy. 7 more flew east for 18 hours, refueling on the way, minimising their communications to stay silent. Just before they reached Iran, a US submarine launched more than 24 missiles towards a nuclear site at Isfahan. Then the B-2s entered Iranian airspace, apparently without being spotted, before striking 2 more target areas. That included dropping 14 so-called massive ordnance penetrators, or bunker buster bombs.
Final battle damage will take some time, but initial battle damage assessments indicate that all 3 sites sustained extremely severe damage and destruction.
So, how successful were the US strikes? The key target was a place called Fordo. The B-2 bombers flew a route that took them high above the site where Iran enriches uranium, which could be used in nuclear bombs. It's buried in tunnels and deep under a mountain. Now, this is what Fordo looked like before the attack. And this image, confirmed by BBC Verify, is just hours after the strike. And you can see over here these holes. That looks like where the bombs impacted before burrowing down and then exploding. And the white you can see around it is probably concrete dust thrown up by the resulting explosion. Now, here is the Isfahan site before the bombing, and this is what it looks like now. So far, the International Atomic Energy Agency
says it's seen no radiation leaking from the sites. And one possibility is that that's because the nuclear material might not have been there. These images were taken just a couple of days before the attack at Fordo, and they show a large number of trucks. It's possible they could have moved some of the uranium, as Iran has claimed.
This was Natanz nuclear facility before the attack. And the question is whether after it, Iran retains the nuclear material, equipment and scientists, some of whom have been killed, to rebuild or even race for a nuclear bomb. If so, then we may see even more strikes.
There is no doubt this attack is a violation of the United Nations Charter and as well as armed aggression to the Iranian national sovereignty and Iranian territorial integrity.
But international law will not stop this conflict escalating. Iran could hit back by firing missiles at US bases in neighbouring Iraq or in Bahrain or Qatar. It could even close the Strait of Hormuz. That's an economically vital route through which shipping and especially oil flows. As American B-2s landed back at base in Missouri, this mission may be over. But the war they are now part of may only have just begun. Gordon Carrera, BBC News.
Well, we can talk now to our economics editor, Faisal Islam, and our political editor, Chris Mason. And Faisal, picking up on what Gordon was saying there, I mean, that threat to potentially close the Straits of Hormuz, I mean, that would have a huge economic impact, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. We're on the pathway to potential serious economic consequences. The interesting thing is, up until this point, over the past couple of weeks, since Israel and Iran started trading missiles, we have had a pretty calm markets. Oil price up about 9%, which would have had an impact on price, but, definitely not any sort of crisis. The oil markets open in about an hour and all focus on some words coming out of Tehran from the parliament, not from the government, saying that they will close the straits. Now, what does that actually mean? It depends. There are some reasons why you might think Tehran would have some restraint here. They export their oil to China, for example. We're already seeing the Americans saying to China, you need to talk to the Iranians, tell them not to do this. But you get 20% of the world's oil, 20% of the world's gas coming from Qatar, increasingly important for Europe since the Russia-Ukraine war. All of this obviously depends on the cycle of diplomatic and military escalation too. But unlike Russia-Ukraine, in this case, it wouldn't be a side product of the conflict. This would be a weapon in Iran's armoury to try and internationalise the crisis through the world economy.
All right, Faisal, we'll pick up, Chris, on some of that in a moment. Before I talk to you, though, let's just hear a little of Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, with some of his responses just a little earlier today.
We've long had concerns about the Iranian nuclear programme and been very clear that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. The US has now taken action to alleviate that threat. It is important that we now de-escalate the situation, stabilise the region and get the parties back around the table to negotiate.
That was part of what he said earlier. And Chris, I mean, really treading quite a difficult line here.
Yeah, so the Prime Minister has spoken to President Trump tonight, but crucially, Jane, there wasn't that call beforehand, which could have been demanding a yes or no answer from the Prime Minister. In other words, whether the UK was willing to get involved in any way. So, for instance, granting permission to use the airbase at Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean. And that would have been a real dilemma for the Prime Minister, because on the one hand, he's been talking about de-escalation. There's a suggestion that there were concerns raised privately about the legal basis for being involved. So saying yes would have been difficult, but then saying no would have been difficult when he's been assiduously building a relationship with President Trump. So how do we assess the UK's position tonight? It is willing the ends that America is pursuing, which is removing Iran's nuclear threat, but it is conspicuously not explicitly endorsing the means, in other words, America's attacks. Now, the Conservatives say that this is equivocation, that it is moral cowardice. President Trump was openly dismissive earlier in the weekend on European efforts at diplomacy. Those efforts, though, continue. As I say, the Prime Minister talking to the President by phone tonight. The Foreign Secretary has spoken to Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, during the attacks while they were taking place, and again today, as well as speaking to the Iranians, the Israelis and others. The UK position is one that diplomacy is the long-term path to a long-term solution that ensures that Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. The thing is, America wasn't willing to listen to Europe beforehand. The question now is whether it'll be willing to listen in the future. And in the next couple of days, President Trump, the Prime Minister and plenty of others getting together at the NATO summit in the Netherlands to work out what to do next, amongst other things.
Chris, thanks very much. Chris Mason, Faisal Islam, thank you. Well, Iran's president has said that his country won't be bullied and that the US must receive a response to its aggression. So what are the options now for Iran's leaders? The BBC isn't currently allowed to broadcast from inside the country, but the BBC has a Persian service that reports on what's happening there. This report is from Shirvas Ardalan of the BBC Persian service here in London.
In the center of the crowd, Iran's president, surrounded by hundreds of party faithful, venting their fury at the United States. What America did is truly unforgivable, says this woman. Iran is stronger than they perceive. But after last night's US attacks, the regime here is seriously weakened. So what comes next? The Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei could swallow his pride and possibly save his regime and the country from further damage. Or he could fight on and risk everything. Domestic public opinion is now divided and confused.
The response must be firm and decisive. What's at stake here is the very identity of being Iranian.
In my opinion, Iran needs to engage in some reflection and contemplation.
As for the country's Revolutionary Guard, it responded by saying US military bases in the region are vulnerable. But they know retaliation would invite further US attacks. This is a state TV reporter who went to Fordow. I can't see much damage, he says. For now, it's America's word against Iran's. Weakened and humiliated, the Iranian regime will struggle to maintain its credibility and grip on power in the face of widespread discontent. Siavash Ardalan, BBC News.
Well, some people in Iran have chosen to cross to bordering countries. Our correspondent Orla Guerin reports now from Turkey's border with Iran at the Kapikoy border crossing, where she's been speaking to people as they arrive.
Turkey's border with Iran, flanked by mountains, and now a gateway to and from a country under attack. At the Kapikoy crossing this morning, we found movement in both directions. Some fleeing the bombing by Israel and America, others rushing back home to be with loved ones. Amir, a retired British Iranian, had just fled Tehran.
And what was your feeling when you got across the border here?
Feeling relieved, really, to be honest with you. I feel relieved, yes.
How dangerous was the situation in Tehran?
It is very dangerous. It is bad. The sky belongs to the Israelis. So they can do what they like. They're just coming in, they just bomb and go. And nothing there to stop them because they've got the sky and that's it.
Very scary for you.
Very, very scary for everyone.
Amir says he got out with no help from the British embassy.
But all of a sudden, embassy's closed, staff are gone, phone is cut off, and nobody answered. So I had to get my way out of the country. That's the way I'm here now.
You had to come on your own?
I had to, yes.
This is what he left behind, a country under fire, a regime that is holding on, and a war that may now escalate. But some, like 13-year-old Dariush, are hoping that a new Iran may emerge from the ashes. He crossed the border today with his younger brother and his mother. He told me he'll go home if change comes. God willing, Iran will be free. Soon all of us will live in freedom, he says, and the Islamic Republic will be gone. But among those going back into Iran today, there was more caution. We found no one willing to speak on camera. One man told us, "We're too afraid."
Well, in the last half an hour or so, we've seen a few more people coming out from Iran, bringing their suitcases. What we witnessed today was not a flood. By and large, it was people leaving who had the means to do so, who had a place to go to. One man told us he had friends and relatives who wanted to leave, but didn't have passports and couldn't get out. Now, on the critical question of what happens to the regime, we heard very differing opinions. One government employee who was going back in said he believed the regime would fall in the end, not now, but he feared that at that point there would be a takeover by the military. A younger man said to us, look, the leadership has hung on for decades. They can probably hang on now. And even among those who were hoping for change, wishing for change, believing it would come, there were also fears being expressed about how many people might be killed. And tonight, just across the border behind me inside Iran, no one has any idea what is coming next. And that holds true across the region.
Orla, thank you. Orla Gearin. As we've heard, Iran says it's keeping all options open in terms of retaliation, but its immediate response today was to launch more missile strikes on Israel, which began direct hostilities when it attacked Iran 10 days ago. Iranian missiles struck Haifa and Tel Aviv, injuring more than 80 people. Tonight, President Netanyahu has said Israel will keep going until it achieves its goals. Lucy Williamson reports from Tel Aviv.
Iran once saw its ballistic missiles as a deterrent against Israeli attacks. But even the intense barrage that shook Israel this morning isn't shaking Israeli support for the war. A nearby care home slowly evacuated, room by room. 10 days into this war, Israel's Prime Minister is determined to continue. Buildings may be turned to rubble, but there's no crack in public support.
We got out of bed and we went to the safe room, heard a tremendous boom. When we came back, we saw our apartment was not our apartment anymore.
We're okay. Everybody's okay. They want us destroyed, and we're not going to let it happen.
This conflict has exposed Iran's weaknesses and has become more dangerous with America's intervention overnight. For 10 days, Iran has been bombarding Israeli cities. Israel hasn't blinked. Tehran has already lost the protection of its proxies in the region, and its ballistic missiles are not the deterrent it had hoped. It now faces the critical decision of whether negotiations offer a better chance of protection than a nuclear weapon. Israel's Prime Minister said today that America's intervention was a turning point in the war.
History will record that President Trump acted to deny the world's most dangerous regime the world's most dangerous weapons. His leadership today has created a pivot of history that can help lead the Middle East and beyond to a future of prosperity and peace.
But not all American intelligence agencies shared Israel's assessment that Iran had suddenly begun racing to build a nuclear weapon.
All I know is that from an Israeli perspective, our margin of error on Iran and its nuclear program is exactly zero. And all we have to do is make one mistake and we're dead. And if the Israeli government concluded that it was going to err on the side of survival, it was going to err on the side of survival.
This is Benjamin Netanyahu's war. Israel's Prime Minister has wanted to strike Iran for decades, and he's already drawn in an American president who wanted to avoid it. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Tel Aviv.
Well, we'll get the thoughts of Lise Doucet in just a moment, our chief international correspondent. But just to tell you what President Trump has been saying on Truth Social, his social media platform, just in the last few moments in relation to regime change. And that's why we're bringing this to you. It's not politically correct to use the term regime change, says the president. But if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be a regime change? Let's talk to Lise. Lots to look ahead to in terms of what's happening next week, Lise, but I'm interested in your thoughts on that as well, just in the last few moments.
Yes, in the midst of this escalating military pressure, the R word, regime change, keeps coming up. At the briefing at the Pentagon early this morning, it was the first question asked by journalists who said, is this about regime change? Like, where is this going to go? And Peter Hegseth, the Defence Secretary, was adamant, one-line answer, this is not about regime change. And never mind that Prime Minister Netanyahu, the first day that he began Israel's military operations 10 days ago, he made it clear that he would like it to be about regime change. But I think, putting aside Truth Social, the real question on everyone's mind tonight, Jane, is what is Iran going to do next? And it does seem clear that at some point, in some way, Iran will want to retaliate. But can it do it without ratcheting up the pressure? Because there is this danger in these febrile times of a dangerous miscalculation. Because the other thing that President Trump said today, he seemed to suggest these strikes were what we call them a one and done. In other words, in his words, we've obliterated Iran's nuclear program, so this is over. But that's not likely to be the reality, and certainly not the view of Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel, his new partner in these strikes, who's likely to want to draw the U.S. in even more so that he can cement his success in having the United States play a key role. But this week, Jane, finally, is going to be a week where many are going to be at President Trump's ear. Most of all, at the NATO summit at The Hague, as Chris Mason mentioned, European leaders are going to say you've got to de-escalate, take the path to diplomacy. Arab and European allies are going to be also on the phone to Iran. Iran says it won't talk while the bombs are falling. While the bombs are falling, tension will only keep rising.
Lise, thanks so much. Lise Doucette.